Good afternoon, everyone. Our topic is environmental racism. This presentation is by Layla Madison, Andre Starks, and Zaria Holmes. Environmental racism is basically the disproportionate exposure, waste, and environmental hazards to racial ethics and low-income communities. This means that people of color are more likely to live in areas with high pollution and environmental hazards. This unfortunately happens to be a serious impact on society. For example, people in these communities experience higher rates of diseases like asthma, cancer, which affect their life's overall expectancy. It also reinforces poverty because people in these areas often have fewer resources to move or access better health care. So overall, environmental racism doesn't just affect individuals; it creates long-term inequities across society. Moving to slide 3.
Research shows that environmental racism is systematic, not random. Studies like Alvarez connect it to structural racism, and other research shows that race and income strongly affect who is exposed to pollution. This creates serious consequences. Communities face higher rates of asthma, cancer, and developmental issues, along with economic disadvantages like lower property values. Over time, this leads to shorter life expectancy and long-term inequality. A real example is the Flint water crisis, where a mostly black community was exposed to contaminated water due to governmental failure. This shows how environmental racism happens in real life. Next slide.
So environmental racism is a global issue, not just a U.S. problem. Many developing countries face the worst environmental conditions because wealthier nations and corporations often move pollution and waste to those regions. This creates major impacts on society, including their drinking water being unsafe. They have higher disease rates and also limited access to healthy environments. While this is a global issue, there are global efforts to kind of like address this issue. Um, there are like there are environmental policies that are put in place and activisms. Many countries still lack funding and enforcement to kind of like completely solve this problem, so it's still an ongoing U.S. problem. However, this does show that environmental racism is tied to global inequity, and it does affect millions of people worldwide. On to slide 5.
So bouncing off from that slide, efforts to address environmental racism include the environmental justice movement and recognizing racism as a public health issue. Politics have also focused on improving air quality and access to green spaces. These efforts have increased awareness and research, but results are mixed. While there has been some progress, structural inequalities still exist, and marginalized communities continue to face higher exposures to environmental risk. Overall, policies haven't fully solved the problem because they don't address the deeper systematic causes. On to the next slide.
Do I have any ideas for the U.S. society and how they can address this problem in the future? We could start by creating and enforcing environmental laws that protects all communities equally. A short-term solution would be that they would need more regulations from the government over pollution and hold companies accountable for their part in environmental damage. The government um, could also help people with better access to cleaner water, and communities that have been affected will be the first to receive support with this new act. As for long term, there needs to be a change in zoning laws so that facilities that are hazardous could not be placed in certain neighborhoods. What happens if the social problem is not addressed? People who live in these areas can develop serious life-threatening conditions like cancer, asthma, and etc. There will be a bigger gap between the wealthy and low-income community as well if this happens. This is our For Excited page. And thank you for listening to our presentation. We hope you have an amazing summer. And
Thank
thank you
y'all.
for allowing us in your class.